Hey friends, it's Jasmine from Jasmine's Astrology, but you can call me Jay. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I don't have a forecast of any kind for you, but I do have a little bit of a 101 on the moon phases and what they might mean in a birth chart. So, you may already know that in addition to your sun sign, you also have a moon sign. You also have a Venus sign, a Mercury sign, a Mars sign, etc. And you also have a moon phase. So, whatever part of the lunar cycle the moon was in while you were born is going to translate to your natal moon phase. So, for example, anybody born within the last few days of when this episode comes out, they would be born during the new moon. We just had the new moon in Scorpio, and so they would be born during that new moon phase. And in this video, we're going to chat about the new moon phase. We're going to chat about all of the moon phases, and hopefully, what it will do is provide you with another layer of like insight and understanding into what the moon means in your chart and how it affects your chart overall. The moon and the lunar cycle was really one of the first parts of astrology that I started working with a lot deeper. And it wound up kind of being the gateway to me becoming an astrologer because seeing how the moon and its phases and its monthly journey through the zodiac could be so indicative of the current energies was really fascinating to me. But it really wasn't until maybe about a year or so ago that I really started to work with moon phase in the birth chart. And I'm currently studying with Kelly Surtees, who is amazing and I can't recommend enough. And she describes the natal moon phase as being the pulse of the chart, something that can actually tone down or dial up certain aspects of the chart depending on the phase itself. Some moon phases will speak to high energy levels, having a lot of drive, a lot of initiative, and maybe feelings of restlessness when action is stalled. And then there are going to be moon phases that give more of an introverted or a working behind the scenes type of vibe, where rest and retreat are more important. And so when we take that information and then layer it on top of the chart, it becomes super interesting to see how that flavors everything else within the chart. Learning my own natal moon phase was a total light bulb moment for me. It really gave further context and some validation for these like certain core desires and motivations that I have. Now, just one thing to keep in mind before we fully dive in is that this is by no means a full lecture on the moon phases. I'm not going to be able to cover everything possible, every, possible facet of the lunar cycle. That would take a much longer amount of time. But my intention here is to really just get you more familiar with the phases and what their symbolism could mean for your chart and for your life. And I'm also going to share how to determine what moon phase you even have, which of course you could find out very easily by going to a site like astro.com or some other places on the internet. And if you have astrology software, obviously that's going to be super easy. And I use that all the time. But there is something kind of magical in learning how to calculate it by hand. It does require a little bit of math, but it's super basic. And if I can do it, you can do it. And I'm going to share a visual image that will help us figure it out. Okay, so the chart in front of us has a moon phase, and we're going to figure out what the moon phase is. And all of the steps are here. So if you want to take a screenshot or if you need to come back to the video, but all the information is there. So we can see that this chart has the sun in Gemini and the moon in Aries. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is subtract the degree of the sun from 29 because that is the most possible degrees within the sign. Because, of course, we go 0 to 29, not 1 to 30. So this particular sun happens to be at 1 degree of Gemini. So if we take 1 from 29, we're left with 28. We'll tuck that number aside for now. Then what we want to do is add 30 degrees for each full zodiac sign between the sun and the moon. And we want to move in proper zodiacal order to figure that out. So what does that mean? That means that we're not taking the shortest distance from, Gemini to Aries, but we're moving all the way around the chart in the proper order. So, Cancer follows Gemini, Leo follows Cancer, Virgo follows Leo. So we'll count all the way around, and there are 9 signs between Gemini and Aries. So then we take 9, multiply it by 30, we're left with 270. The final step is, well, actually the second last step, sorry to jump the gun there, is going to be adding the degree of the moon. So we know the degree of the moon is 8 Aries. So then we take that all together, the 28 from the sun, the 270 from all of the signs in between, and the 8 degrees of the moon. And what do we get? 306 degrees. So here we can see that 306 degrees would fall into the waning quarter moon phase, sometimes known as the third quarter or the final quarter, the last quarter. I call it the waning quarter. So that's what phase that chart had. And you can do that for any chart, anywhere, anytime. It's pretty simple. It does take a little bit to get used to, but I have faith in you. You can do it. And it feels like magic when you figure it out and you can look at a birth chart and figure out anybody's moon phase without any sort of technology helping you. It's magical. And we will talk more about the waning quarter phase, of course, just in a little bit. But right now, let's go all the way back to the new moon and start there. So the new moon runs from 0 degrees to 44 degrees, conjunct or away from the sun. So the new moon starts when the sun and moon are at the same degree of the zodiac, and it continues until the moon is 44 degrees away from the sun. This is the beginning of the lunar cycle. The moon is reborn at this phase, and that might translate to somebody who often likes to start over, to start fresh. Maybe they move around a lot or switch careers a few times. Maybe they change their look up every few years. There's an energy towards turning over a new leaf. There's an openness to trying new things and seeking new paths to walk down. There is a liminal space type of energy as well, of like constantly crossing thresholds and then returning to cross new ones. There is a deep curiosity with the new moon towards what lies ahead, towards what new opportunities might be available. It is a bit like cardinal sign energy. So, our cardinal signs being Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, the signs that begin new seasons. There is, because, the newness of it all, but there is also this strength around putting things into motion, taking initiative, taking action, and perhaps a struggle with fully seeing things through or staying with something for a super long period of time. New moon energy, there's just like so much enthusiasm and excitement and a very like spring like hope for the possibility of things, for what could be. And that hope can often inspire others too. So, new moon people can be really great at pumping other people up or even helping somebody move through that transitionary space. New moon folks might be inclined to make things from scratch, to build things from the ground up, to forge new paths. A lot of times decision making for new moon people doesn't come from a very logical place. It's very tied to instinct and intuition and feeling. There's maybe not a lot of ruminating on something. It's not to say that they're not intelligent or not using any kind of wisdom, but it's a more internal type of thing. We're not really looking for data and facts here. There's definitely a quality of being excited to just sort of leap into something. The new moon is the beginning of the waxing cycle for the moon. The waxing cycle is when the moon is growing. It's growing in size, it's growing in light. It is, that it's part of the growth cycle. It's part of the accumulation cycle for the moon. And the new moon is where all of that gets kicked off. But it is also one of the darker phases of the moon because there's no light at the beginning of the new moon cycle, and there's still very little light even as we get towards the end of this cycle. So some new moon folks are going to be more comfortable working behind the scenes, whereas, others are going to be fine to do their thing more in the public eye, or even to be in leadership roles of sorts. Maybe different times in the life will bring different preferences forward. And I think obviously, the further along someone is in the new moon phase, the more light their moon is going to have, and the more likely they're going to feel comfortable with a certain level of visibility. So then we have the crescent moon, also known as the waxing crescent. This runs from 45 degrees to 89 degrees away from the sun. This is the next step in the waxing phase. The moon is really emerging now from the sun, collecting more light and growing in size each day. There are some similarities here to the new moon phase, the very spring like new growth qualities, the curiosity for what lies ahead, the enthusiasm to try new things. The difference here, though, is that what we see is something a little more stable and consistent. The crescent moon person might not tend so much towards starting over so often. There is still the desire for newness and freshness, but with a touch more discernment. So maybe there's less restarting and a bit more follow through, a little bit more longevity for endeavors. There's a sense of being able to push a little further forward and to strengthen in some regard. So instead of switching up their career, a crescent moon person might stay in one field for a longer period of time or even a long period of time, but do various types of work and projects within that field. Crescent moon folks might be the kind of people that are always picking up a new skill, picking up a new hobby, seeking to learn new information of some kind. And there does seem to be some kind of purpose and focus to these learning endeavors, though sometimes I'm sure it can feel like or come across as kind of a scattered energy. But I think it does come from a place of looking to accumulate information and resources. The moon is in that accumulation phase, it's building. And with all of that accumulation, I think comes a level of creativity and being able to kind of make something your own. With the crescent moon phase, there is this energy of like anticipation, knowing that there is more to come. And because of that, there's kind of always something to be built up, something to be worked on within that anticipation. And there's this quality of wanting to move ahead, wanting to move into the future and away from what is already known. And I think perhaps in gaining various skills, various pieces of information, knowledge, there's a confidence that can be gained to assert oneself and feel that motivation to forge ahead. And I think it is important for Crescent Moon folks to take all of these skills, take all of that information, take all of these resources they're accumulating, and put them into motion somehow. Okay, on to the waxing quarter phase, which runs from 90 degrees to 134 degrees away from the sun. This is sometimes also called the first quarter moon or even the half moon. I call it the waxing quarter. And it is here where the sun and moon reach a bit of a turning point in the cycle because this phase begins with a square between the luminaries, a square between the sun and the moon, and square aspects are often a point of crisis and tension where some kind of adjustment needs to be made so that we can keep moving forward. So a waxing crescent person might feel that they are always tweaking things, always solving some kind of problem, reconfiguring and shifting their direction or perspective so they can continue to take action and create momentum. It might even be something that they really enjoy is this like constant tweaking and adjusting. There might also sometimes be feelings of an urgency around that and sort of just wanting to go full steam ahead with any given facet of life. Decide and do is a really good tagline for waxing crescent folks. These are the type of people that can really rise to the challenge. They might even be described as fiery and passionate, potentially a little headstrong, but very determined and driven. When they fix their focus on something, it can be hard to knock them off course. And there is a more defined or refined focus here than in the earlier phases. Growth and freshness is still very much important, but the energy can really be channeled a little more precisely. Waxing crescent folks tend to be quite independent and self-motivated, usually not a lot of need for external stimulus to get moving. They tend to have higher energy levels and can do really well when they focus on getting enough physical activity, whatever that looks like for that person. There's definitely a very expressive and bold quality here, and definitely a willingness to take risks, which can come from a place of impulsivity sometimes. But I think, especially here within the waxing crescent, it does come from a place of confidence, whether that confidence is earned or not. But it is a sense of like, yes, I got this. Let's just go for it and see what happens. We can always tweak and adjust later. Now, some folks with this phase will have the sun and moon in a trine aspect as opposed to that square aspect, and that's definitely going to change the flavor a little bit. Perhaps reducing some of that urgency and tension because that square configuration really brings in that more tense energy. Now, there's still going to be that quality of tweaking and adjusting, but perhaps it feels almost less effortful or, like I said, less urgent. The trine is a very supportive aspect. So maybe the waxing crescent or waxing quarter person with the trine has more external resources available to them. Okay, on to the gibbous phase, also known as the waxing gibbous. This runs from 135 degrees to 179 degrees, so just short of that 180-degree opposition, which we will get to, but the gibbous phase continues the themes of growth and accumulation, and we're now really reaching a point of ripening and coming into fullness. There is a sense of like being very close to something, being almost there, almost ready. There are just things that maybe need a little bit of evaluation or improvement to get fully there. Personal growth and self-development is definitely a theme with this phase, and I think allowing for that self-growth and internal change can be especially nourishing for gibbous moon phase folks. This part of the cycle is so close to the full moon phase, and the energy is really raised up because of that. So there might be a desire to prepare, organize, refine, and perfect to sort of get things like just right, to get things to that, you know, place where they are just ready to go in the instant that they need to be. And I think sometimes this phase can get stuck in a loop of like never quite finishing something because there's always something more to refine. So, just always something more to perfect instead of just saying, no, it's complete, I'm done. But, then again, this might also make for somebody that is really great with details and logistics. As the moon fills with light, its visibility increases. And so that is sort of reflected in the person who has a moon phase with a lot of light in it. And with the gibbous phase, there's a lot of visibility, right? Like the moon is very nearly full. And this natal moon can suggest being in the public eye of, in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily. It doesn't mean that you're going to be like famous on a global scale, though it is possible, but maybe you're just very well known in your community or your neighborhood. Or maybe the gibbous moon person is in the spotlight a lot at work or in their family or in their friend group. Maybe the gibbous moon person has the house where all the big events happen. And I think the closer you are to the end of the gibbous phase, the higher your visibility will be. It might just also be that like you enjoy taking on leadership roles or you like being in the spotlight, whether or not it's on some sort of grand scale or not. There's definitely a similar risk-taking energy that we had in the waxing quarter, but the urgency and the potential impulsivity isn't there as much or at all. There is still a passion and drive towards following the instincts and going for something, but I feel like that pressure really gets lifted at this phase. And then we have the full moon, which runs from 180 degrees to 224 degrees ahead of the sun. and actually in opposition and then ahead of the sun. And it's interesting because this phase does include the exact moment when the sun and moon are in that opposition, which is the full moon, right? But then it also carries us into the waning half of the cycle. The waning part of the moon cycle is when the moon begins to decrease in light and decrease in size. Because, once the moon is full, of course, it then has to empty. And so while this phase still carries a lot of those high visibility and high vitality factors that we saw in the gibbous phase, there is also a sense of shifting away from the personal growth and accumulation that we really engaged with during the waxing phases. And again, having this phase doesn't mean that you're going to be super famous, but there could be something about being in the spotlight or having opportunities where you get to be in the lead or at the center of something that are either going to be constantly presented to you or that might be, deeply fulfilling for you, or maybe both. In general, with the full moon phase, I think there is a vibe of like wanting to go big in many ways, wanting to do it all, to take the big adventures, to take advantage of all of the things that life has to offer. And again, the scale of that will be relative to the actual person's life. It's going to be different for every single person that has this full moon phase. There's also a heightened focus on relationships in this phase and just relational dynamics in general. That opposition between the sun and moon really highlights some sort of partnership, collaboration, negotiation type of energy. It can also describe tension and about having to kind of navigate opposing ideals and goals. But there's something here about the full moon phase person finding some kind of profound meaning within relationships. There is a lot of wisdom and clarity to be gained from being in relationship. That's how the full moon person might feel. That there is illumination to be gained from, having that reflective energy, having that mirror-like energy of being able to be in conversation with others. And I definitely don't just mean like romantic bonds. I mean partnerships of all kinds, business partnerships, family relationships, whatever. There is just this sense that there's some kind of greater purpose and meaning and a deeper understanding of self that comes through being in relationship, through having to navigate the tension of opposites and looking to create harmony through those differences. All of that is potentially very rich territory for the full moon phase person. Then we reach the disseminating phase, which runs from 225 degrees to 269 degrees. This is also sometimes called the waning gibbous phase. And we are, much more fully into the waning phase of the moon cycle as we reach the disseminating phase. The moon is emptying light, decreasing in size, and the symbolism that follows is that someone with a disseminating moon would be emptying out in some way as well. That they're the type of person who wants to share and give back from a place of abundance, from a place where their cup is full, so to speak. The disseminating moon person might have this sense that they are meant to share what they know, offering wisdom or advice around their own lived experience or things that they have learned, that they will find some kind of meaning in offering others guidance in some way, shape, or form. So, disseminating moon folks might be like teachers, writers, journalists, musicians, podcasters, guides of some kind. We find these types of people with other moon phases as well, of course, but there's an archetypal quality here in regards to that like teacher or guide figure. It's the distribution and circulation of knowledge. And there can also really be an inspirational element to it as well. And so I think that's why musicians and writers sort of fit into this category, who are like sharing their feelings, sharing their ideas. Words and music can really uplift and inspire people, but so can a really good teacher, right? And there's always this underlying quality with the disseminating phase of wanting to give back in ways that make things better for other people. So there is a fulfillment in sharing this stuff, a fulfillment for the person sharing it, but with the intention that they are going to share something that fulfills others as well. Disseminating moon folks might also want to be in community spaces, contributing in that way, looking for ways to improve their neighborhoods and communities in ways that make things better for everybody. We might also relate this phase to a tree or a plant whose fruits or whatever is being grown is ready for harvest. It's ready to be offered and can provide nourishment to those who consume it. And then beyond just like teaching or writing, there's also this idea of like leading by example, like absolutely just living out your beliefs as the disseminating moon person, walking the talk, so to speak. And I think disseminating moon folks might find it difficult to be in situations or surroundings where they can't fully live in their true values. And this is why we might see them stepping away from what's traditional or conventional so that they can fully embody their values. As we move away from the fullness of the moon and start emptying out, we're moving away from what we've known, the things that have worked, the things that were in full visibility and starting to, yeah, step away from that, to release it, to let it go. This is just the beginning of that. And then we have the waning quarter, or also sometimes known as the third or the final quarter. And this runs from 270 degrees to 314 degrees ahead or away from the sun. And here we find another square aspect between the sun and moon, and therefore another point of tension or crisis where adjustments and choices are necessary. But there's definitely a different tone here because instead of being part of the cycle where things are building and ramping up, we're at a phase where things are winding down and coming to a close. So for waning quarter folks, there might be an ever present sense that opportunities should be taken because who knows if there will be another chance. It's not as much about making progress in the way that it was with the waxing quarter person, but rather that there is an acute awareness of time and a drive towards making the most of any given situation. Just like with the waxing quarter phase, there is an inclination towards shifting direction, pivoting, and reorienting. But where the waxing quarter is more about making those changes in order to move forward, the waning quarter is almost about stepping back, not about regressing or moving backwards, but stepping away from what's known and what's already been done. This phase continues those themes of embodying values and challenging conventions and societal norms. And there's a big push for the waning quarter folks to live as authentically as possible, to stay true to themselves. And that often means, being okay with ongoing change and shifting direction because as we learn new information and gain new perspectives, the way we live and what matters to us is changing and evolving. Now, I haven't come across this in my own work with the moon phases, but in basically every text that I read about moon phases, in all of the classes that I've taken, this idea of the midlife pivot comes up constantly. So I just want to mention it and put it out there. And it's this idea that somewhere in the waning quarter person's midlife, there is some kind of standout change in life direction. Leaving a job, leaving a relationship or a community or a faith, whatever it might be. And it might be something that comes as quite a surprise because up until that point, there had been so much investment and so much built up within that career, that relationship, whatever. And it can be hard for people on the outside to kind of understand such a large shift for that person. It does make sense with the symbolism, we're towards the end of the cycle and we hit that square point where direction is changing, we're pivoting, we're adjusting. So I don't know, if you're a waning quarter person and you've had this huge midlife pivot, let me know in the comments. But I've definitely seen this happen on smaller scales and like more frequently throughout the life of a person with a waning quarter phase, this sort of like constant reevaluation of beliefs and connections and purpose and the motivation to pivot when necessary. And then we reach the balsamic phase, which runs from 315 degrees to 359 degrees. It is also known as the dark moon, sometimes called the waning crescent. And this is the final phase. It's the ending of the lunar cycle. We are once again at a place of little to no light from the moon, and so that does suggest a more inward-oriented quality. We might see that things like privacy, alone time, time spent in reflection and contemplation will just be more important for these folks. There could be a bit of a hermit-like quality. The balsamic moon person's lived experience might involve a lot of endings and closure. This could be a person who works in end of life services or who somehow facilitates, with the closing down of projects. Working behind the scenes or in liminal type spaces or spaces of transition might be how this shows up for people. I know someone with a balsamic moon phase that is working with tarot and also is a psychic and works as a death doula as well. So is very much in those like liminal, not super earthy, not super tangible spaces. Rest and retreat might be especially important for these people. It's not that they can't be social or have meaningful relationships with others, absolutely not, but they might just require a little more time to recharge and reset from social experiences. They might prefer to be in smaller groups, more intimate settings. They might feel the most energized or capable of being their full selves when in these smaller groups or when in quieter spaces. Feeling like a late bloomer could be an experience for these people, and not necessarily that they'll only find meaning towards the end of their life, but that they just come around to things a little slower than some people. The way that they process and approach things is just on a different timeline, which isn't wrong or bad. It's just different. It's that liminal space energy. It's kind of working, yeah, on your own timeline. On the other hand, that feeling of sort of being out of sync with others might be present with a balsamic moon person because they're almost somewhat ahead of their time. Like they might already see what it will take others, years to fully understand. There's that idea of them being the old soul or wise beyond their years, someone who has already accumulated so much wisdom and so much experience and then has this desire to kind of leave behind a kind of legacy for those who come next. Themes of surrender or releasing attachment could be also quite prominent for these folks, and it might be something that comes quite easily to them and just shows up often, or it might be something that they have an ongoing lesson around. Okay, so that's just a little taste of each of the phases. Hopefully, you can start applying this to your chart. And now let's round things out with a quick look at the secondary progressed moon phase. So, first of all, what even are progressions, right? Progressions are a timing technique. It's a highly personalized timing technique, technically called secondary progressions. You'll maybe hear them called progressions or secondary progressions, same thing. And the idea is that one day in real time is equal to 1 year in symbolic time. So, the planetary aspects and movements that happen over a 24-hour period in real time are then given meaning for a full year in progressed time. And the way that we use secondary progressions is we start on the day of someone's birth. So the day that you're born, that becomes connected to your first year of life. So anything that happened, basically your birth chart is that first year of life. And then the day after you were born becomes representative of your second year of life. So technically the year that you turn one, your second year on Earth, anything that happened the following day is going to be sort of stretched out over a 1 year period. So any of the aspects that formed between the planets, any of the planets that changed signs or changed directions, all of the new and the full moons and all of the phases that come in between, all of these happenings that took place over like the first 90 days of your life will then represent and reflect the changes and themes that play out over 90 years of your life. So it's a pretty cool timing technique. It takes a little bit to wrap your head around, but it's super interesting. It is very symbolic, of course, but highly, highly personalized. And so with the moon specifically, we know that in real time, the moon changes signs every 2 to 3 days, and it changes phases every 3 to 4 days. And so in the progressed chart, we're going to see that about every 2 to 3 years, your secondary progressed moon will enter a new zodiac sign. And then about every 3 to 4 years, your secondary progressed moon will enter a new phase. And this happens with all your planets. So you could pull up a progress chart right now and see, I mean, with the exception of probably like Jupiter through Pluto, you're going to have signs or planets in different signs. And it gives you a totally new flavor for the current, you know, uh, current energies in this time. It's really fascinating. Now, your natal moon phase will never change. Your birth chart stuff doesn't change. That remains intact. Like that's always going to be your natal chart. The natal moon phase, that pulse, that energy, that tone, that will always be present. But just like when we go through certain transits with the real-time moving planets, there are new currents of energy and new stories that can unfold through progressions. And the secondary progressed moon phase offers another layer to help us understand our current emotional landscape and our larger cycles of growth and release. It can point towards changes in routine, eating habits, health and vitality, visibility, and opportunities. The natal moon phase offers a sense of tone and pulse for the life overall, where the secondary progressed moon phase says something about the tone and pulse for the various chapters of our lives. And I think that can really help us to understand and contextualize the way that we move through current transits as well. Like let's say Mars is doing something really tricky in our charts, like transiting Mars is affecting our chart in some sort of way, and we're experiencing it as a lot to handle. It's exhausting, it's frustrating. But then let's say, a couple of years later, as Mars finds its way back around to that same area of the chart, we're in a different moon phase. We're in a different secondary progressed moon phase, I should say. And those Marsy tricks don't feel as aggravating. We maybe have more energy, more passion or motivation to deal with the tricks coming our way. So after you determine the secondary progressed moon phase that you're in, you can see how that maybe describes a certain chapter that you're moving through, but then you can also compare and contrast with your natal moon phase for further insight. Because at first it might seem really exciting that you're, entering a new moon phase or you're about to be in the new moon phase, whatever. Things are starting again and there's going to be new opportunities. But if you have a natal full moon phase, the difference there might actually be somewhat challenging. Like the energy and vitality levels, the overall visibility, and even the mindset are very different between these phases. So there could be some internal struggle happening at that time. The new moon is typically much quieter and more introspective than the very outward and relational full moon. However, both the new and full moon have a certain drive and motivation towards taking action and initiative. So there is a commonality there. Now, someone with a natal disseminating phase who is moving through a secondary progressed gibbous phase might have a bit of an easier go. Both of these phases have relatively the same amount of light, so the visibility factor is similar. The outward oriented and expressive qualities are pretty similar as well. And both of these phases tend to focus on some kind of support, whether it's community support with the disseminating phase or more personal support with the gibbous phase. So we've got a lot of congruous energies there. But where there might be some contrast is the fact that the disseminating moon is more about releasing and shedding, and the gibbous moon is much more about accumulation and growth. So the disseminating natal moon person might have to learn about being more open to receiving as they go through this gibbous moon phase. Okay, so how do we determine secondary progressed moon phase? The first way would be to just pull up your progressed chart, and I'm going to leave some links in the video description for websites where you can go and do that. And then you'll just use the same calculation that we used for determining natal phase, but you're going to use the secondary progressed sun and the secondary progressed moon. So we're not looking at anything from the natal chart when determining secondary progressed moon phase. We just look at both the progressed sun and the moon, and then go back and do all those calculations. The other option is to find a moon phase calendar for your year of birth or for your month of birth and then the few months afterwards. This is pretty easy to Google, but I'm also going to leave a couple of links in the video description just in case. And then what you'll do is you'll just count your day of birth as 0, and then the next day is 1, the next day is 2, and so on. And then you keep counting until you find your current age, and that will correspond with your current secondary progressed moon phase. However, most calendars will have the new moon, the full moon, and the quarter phases listed as just a single day. And that doesn't necessarily equate to how we look at the, set degrees for the moon phases. So those calendars won't be as accurate as pulling up your chart. If you're a little more advanced in your astrological learning, you might know how to sort of break down the degree of where everything is, and that calendar will be fine. But I would highly suggest using the sites where you can pull up the progressed chart. Okay, that's all I've got for this video. I really hope it's been helpful or at least entertaining or a good way to pass the time, whatever, but hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you're going to be able to apply it to your chart. Please let me know if you have any questions or need any clarification about any of this info, and let me know in the comments, like what's your natal phase? What's your secondary progressed phase? Do you feel a connection with the natal phase? How is it blending with your secondary progressed phase? And one thing is that let's not forget that this is all just one piece of the chart, right? So don't fret if things aren't feeling like they're totally lining up. When we look at astrology in like sections like this, we do have to remember that it's just one piece of the puzzle. But anyways, feel free to share any or all of those details with me in the comments. I would love to chat more. And thanks so much, everyone, for watching. If you do enjoy my content, please make sure to like and subscribe. It's super helpful and it's super free. And I will be back soon with more astrology insights and other cosmic chit chat. But until then, everyone, I'll catch you in the cosmos.